Where does God fit in all of this, in the idea of absolutes? Can you believe in absolutes without necessarily believing in God, or are those two intertwined?
Well, I think if you're a religious person, everything goes back to God. The natural law certainly does. If you look at the tradition coming out of especially St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, in the 13th century, and I mean, for Thomas, the natural law is an expression of God, and the fact that everything emanates. He uses the word emanation, emanates from God. And so, but he also was very clear that philosophical reasoning can be done separate from theology, and he felt that you could prove the existence of God through reason. You don't need theology to do that, although faith is obviously a big deal for him. Can you understand all these things if you're not a religious person? Yeah, you could say, well, it comes out of evolution theory, it comes out of Darwin, it comes out of materialist philosophy.
What is the harm of relativism? Isn't it just innocuous, you have your truth, I have my truth?
Well, if I say, for example, that I think adultery is wrong, and you say, well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me, first of all, there's no discussion. We can't actually discuss adultery because you've basically said you don't want to talk about it. But if adultery is a concept which a educated and enlightened civilization needs to talk about, it can't be done through a relativistic position.
Right.
It can be dismissed, but it can't be discussed.
So do you think that's why there's not a lot of debate on a lot of hot button issues in our country?
I think everybody has a little knapsack they're carrying around in their back, and in there they put their favorite little values and they pull them out when they want them. But you can't look in my knapsack, I can't look in yours, and buzz off, you know. The fact is, morality used to be considered a public good, or a common good, I should say. That's something that was like a bubble under which we all live. Okay, we debate values, we think about them, we argue about them in certain circumstances. I mean, that's what moral life, vivid and energetic moral life is supposed to be about. But ever since, I would say, the middle of the 19th century, which is when the modern relativistic revolt got going, you could point your finger at John Stuart Mill's little book on liberty if you wanted, because he basically made famous, or notorious from my point of view, he made notorious the concept that morality could be privatized. Mm-hmm. You know, we have private moral bubbles. We live inside our own little moral bubble. And as long as you don't bump into me, and I don't bump into you, then there's no problem. But
so faith became privatized. Morality became privatized.
Yeah, all became privatized. So that's why people are able to say it's true for you but not true for me, because you have your bubble, I have my bubble. No need to talk, right? Because we don't live in the same world.
And that's where the split personality could come from?
I think so, yeah. That's where split personality came from, and it's how we live in I think we live in a infantilized society in which we're made childlike because we feel we no longer have to talk about the most important issues in the country. And even when they come up, we pass them off to judges. We don't call our parliamentary representative and say, you need to discuss this issue in Parliament because this country's going to hell in a handbasket and I want to have it discussed in Parliament. What's the parliamentarian say? He say, listen, that's a charter issue. That's going to go to the judges. I mean, he's looking at his watch and saying, I have to go to lunch. I mean, I can't talk about that in Parliament. They laugh me out of Parliament. Let the judges look after it.
And yet you say there's a shift in our culture that we're maybe turning away from relativism and back to absolutes.
I think people are getting a little tired of it. Parents, for example, are getting tired of having children coming home from school who've been taught relativistic values and cultural relativism and you do your thing and I'll do my thing, you're okay, I'm okay, and all that sort of philosophy. Right in sex ed classes in the schools and things like that, the parents are getting sick of it. And what are they able to say to the kid? What they say usually is, you're doing it because I said so. They just lay down the law. Or they try to tell the kid that there is something like a fixed truth that ought to be followed. Well, you can do that out there, kid, but not in this house. Right. You know, that kind of thing.
But even saying there's a fixed truth is a very controversial thing today.
You know, there was a time, it is today, and I'm embarrassed to say that people are almost proud to say it, as if it's some kind of badge of their open-mindedness. There was a time, not very long ago, when if you turned to a young man or woman and said, you know, what do you believe about so-and-so, about the universe, or about God, or about truth and morality, if someone didn't have a pretty good answer, they would be ridiculed. And if the kid had answered, an adult like me, well, it's true for you, but it's not true for me, sir, I mean, he would have been pitied, just pitied as someone with an empty mind, someone with a mind that was so open that his brains fell out, you know. So,
if relativism is such a flawed theory, as you say it is, then why has it lasted for such a long time?
Because it's convenient. People like it. They can excuse their own behavior. Like I said, they lead a double life. But obviously, people who enjoy moral relativism operate on the basis that there's no foundation to any truth, and therefore anything is possible. You see, if you argue that anything's possible, then anything is possible, including everything evil that you could possibly imagine.
Right, and so even
no,
concepts such as good and evil, that's not
they're gone.
They're not relative.
Yeah.
There is a good and there is an evil.
Yeah, there is a good and there is an evil, yeah. And all human societies have always believed that. I think all people believe it. And if you push them to the wall, this is where they become public.
So it's time to integrate.
I think it's time to integrate and time to have discussions, time to bring things back on the table that have been off the table for too long, and time to provide our own answers to political and moral issues that we've left too long in the hands of judges who are not responsible to us. They have their own visions of how society ought to operate. But I think the country ought to go, at least in a quasi-democratic system, constitutional democratic system, such as we have. It ought to go where we decide it ought to go after a lot of informed discussion. We're not having that discussion, and moral relativism makes it possible for us to avoid the discussion in the first place.